The sun blazed over Buckingham Palace as tourists gathered, cameras flashing, excitement buzzing in the air. But amidst the cheerful crowd, one man stood out. Jack Randall, a cocky white karate champion, his arrogance suffocating the space around him. His target, Richard Hunt, a black Buckingham guard, standing firm in his unshakable discipline. "These guards are nothing but statues," Jack sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. The crowd watched, uncertain. Was he really about to challenge a royal guard? Jack smirked, cracking his knuckles. "Let's see if you can even move." He had no idea. He picked the wrong man to mock. Buckingham Palace stood tall under the bright afternoon sun, its grand architecture serving as a powerful reminder of history and discipline. The courtyard outside bustled with tourists, cameras flashing as families and friends gathered to witness the legendary changing of the guard. The royal guards, dressed in their striking red tunics and towering bearskin hats, stood unshaken, exuding professionalism. They were an iconic symbol of British tradition, unmovable, unshaken, and above all, disciplined. But one man in the crowd saw them differently. Jack Randall, a cocky, muscular white American in his mid-30s, smirked as he pushed through the tourists. A former karate champion, he had spent years training in martial arts, his body sculpted from discipline. But his ego had outgrown his skills. He was known for seeking attention, and today, he had a plan to make sure the world noticed him. Jack scanned the line of Buckingham guards, his sharp gray eyes locking onto one man in particular, Richard Hunt, a towering black royal guard standing motionless by the entrance. Unlike the rest of the crowd, Jack didn't see respect or tradition. He saw a challenge. "Look at these guys," Jack sneered loudly, turning to his group of friends. His deep voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. "Standing there like statues. What is this? A wax museum?" A few people turned, frowning at his comment. Some muttered under their breath, sensing trouble. But Jack wasn't done. He thrived on the attention. "Come on, these guys are supposed to be elite? What a joke." Jack stretched his arms dramatically before throwing a few quick air punches. His movements were sharp, controlled, a display of his fighting experience. "I bet I could knock one of these guys down with a single punch. Easy." His friends exchanged nervous glances. They had seen Jack pull stunts before, but this was different. This wasn't some drunk bar fight or a sparring match. This was Buckingham Palace, and the royal guards were not just props for entertainment. "Jack, maybe chill out," one of his friends muttered, trying to pull him back. "They're just doing their job," Jack scoffed. "What job? Standing still?" He laughed mockingly, drawing more attention from the surrounding tourists. Some whispered among themselves, sensing that something was about to go very wrong. Meanwhile, Richard Hunt, the black royal guard Jack had fixated on, remained as still as stone. His face, partially shadowed by his bearskin hat, showed no emotion. He had spent years in service, trained to withstand taunts, distractions, and all sorts of disrespectful behavior. Jack Randall was no different from the dozens of tourists who thought they could provoke a reaction. But unlike the others, Jack wasn't just talking. He was about to act. Jack took a bold step forward, pushing against the crowd. His arrogance swelled as more phones lifted, people beginning to record. "Hey, soldier boy," he called out, his voice dripping with mockery. "You even alive under there?" A few gasps rippled through the crowd. Some laughed uncomfortably, while others shook their heads in disapproval. Jack grinned, seeing that he had an audience. Richard Hunt didn't move. Jack leaned closer, his smirk widening. "What's the matter? Not allowed to speak without permission?" He waved a hand in front of Richard's face, as if testing if he was real. "I'll bet $100 you won't even flinch if I take a swing at you." The tension thickened. The tourists shifted uneasily, murmuring amongst themselves. Some even took a step back, sensing that things were escalating fast. Richard's jaw tensed ever so slightly, but he remained unmoved. His training demanded absolute control, and control was his greatest weapon. Jack's grin turned into a full-blown smirk. His friends were whispering behind him, telling him to stop, but he wasn't listening. He had already made up his mind. "All right then," Jack cracked his knuckles. "Let's see how tough you really are." He lifted his fists into a karate stance, shifting his weight onto his back foot. The crowd gasped. Richard Hunt remained as still as ever. But beneath his unwavering expression, something had changed. He was ready. Jack was about to learn the hard way. Some battles should never be picked. Jack Randall's grin stretched wider as he watched Richard Hunt stand motionless. The Buckingham Guard's stoic silence only fueled his arrogance. To Jack, this was no longer just a game. It was a challenge. The tourists around them shifted uneasily, sensing that things were getting out of control. Some had already pulled out their phones, recording the moment, waiting to see if the famous British discipline would finally crack. Jack's voice dripped with mockery as he took another step closer. "What's wrong, soldier boy? Cat got your tongue? Or are you just a mute mannequin?" A murmur spread through the crowd. Some whispered in disapproval, while others simply watched in silent tension. Jack wasn't finished. He raised a fist, pretending to throw a punch near Richard's face. His knuckles stopped just inches from the guard's jaw. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Richard didn't flinch. Jack laughed, turning back to his friends. "See? I told you, they're just statues, nothing but decoration." His friends, who had been laughing earlier, now exchanged nervous glances. One of them, a shorter man with a leather jacket, whispered, "Jack, seriously, man, this is a bad idea." Jack waved him off, rolling his eyes. "Relax. What's he gonna do? Yell at me?" He turned back to Richard, stepping even closer, his breath nearly hitting the guard's chin. "Come on, man," he said, his voice lower but still taunting. "You've got to react to something, right?" Richard Hunt remained still, but beneath his disciplined exterior, his grip on his rifle tightened ever so slightly. Jack, oblivious to the subtle shift, felt invincible. The tourists weren't stopping him. The guards weren't stopping him. The power rush hit his bloodstream like a drug. With a dramatic flourish, Jack stepped over the barrier. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. He had just crossed the one unbreakable rule: never, under any circumstances, breach the Queen's Guard's boundary. Some tourists instinctively stepped back. A few even shook their heads, muttering, "This guy's insane." "Jack!" one of his friends hissed urgently. "Get back over here, now!" But Jack didn't listen. He was in full performance mode. With slow, exaggerated steps, he circled Richard, eyeing him like a predator sizing up his prey. "Still nothing, huh?" Jack muttered. "Man, you are really committed to the act." Richard's jaw remained locked, his gaze fixed straight ahead. But something had shifted. His stance had changed ever so slightly, his weight now evenly distributed. His grip on his rifle was firm, ready. Jack, still blind to the warning signs, smirked. "All right then, if you're not going to move, I'll help you out." The tourists held their breath. Jack raised his hand, pretending to dust off Richard's shoulder, as if mocking him for standing still. And that was the final mistake. Richard Hunt was trained for moments like this. Jack had no idea what was about to happen. Jack Randall took a deep breath, stretching his arms as he cracked his knuckles. His ego had never been this inflated. Every camera was on him, every eye in the crowd locked onto his every movement. He was the center of attention, and he was loving it. "You all ready for a real show?" He smirked, raising his voice so that everyone could hear. His friends shifted uneasily behind him, whispering that this was going too far. But Jack wasn't listening. He had already decided. He was going to break the Buckingham Guard's legendary discipline. Richard Hunt, standing tall and stoic, remained motionless. The sun gleamed off his crimson tunic, his black skin smooth under the shadow of his tall bearskin hat. His face was unreadable, but his jaw was tight. Jack was stepping over the line. Jack stepped into a karate stance, spreading his legs and lifting his arms with exaggerated confidence. "Come on, soldier boy," he sneered. "Let's see if you can actually fight." The crowd gasped. Some whispered anxiously, others murmured in disapproval. The Buckingham Guards were known for their discipline, their strict rules, their unbreakable composure. Attacking one? That was an entirely different matter. Jack ignored them all. He faked a punch inches from Richard's face, expecting a reaction. Nothing. No flinch. No movement. The guard remained solid as stone. "Oh, so you are a statue after all?" Jack scoffed, turning to the audience as if expecting applause for his bravado. The crowd remained silent, but the tension in the air was thick. Everyone knew something was about to happen. Jack's lips curled into a cocky smirk. He was done playing around. If the guard wouldn't react, he'd force him to. In one smooth motion, Jack launched a high kick, aimed right at Richard's shoulder. Gasps ripped through the audience. The sound of cameras clicking echoed through the palace courtyard. A woman screamed. But Jack never saw what happened next. Because Richard moved. Faster than anyone expected. Before Jack's foot could make contact, Richard sidestepped with inhuman precision. In the same motion, his arm shot forward, catching Jack's leg midair. Jack's eyes widened. His mind barely had time to register what was happening. His body twisted, his balance completely thrown off. And then, boom! Jack's body slammed into the pavement. The entire crowd erupted in shock. Some cheered, others gasped. A few just stood there, their mouths hanging open. Jack groaned, rolling onto his side. Pain shot through his back. His palms were scraped, his pride shattered. His head spun, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Richard, meanwhile, had already returned to his stance. His expression unreadable, his posture perfect, as if nothing had happened. Jack stared up in disbelief. "You," he started, but no words came out. He was winded, humiliated, and completely outclassed. The crowd broke out into applause. Cheers rang through the square. "He did not even flinch," one man laughed. "That was incredible," a woman gasped. "He deserved that," another bystander called out. Jack stumbled to his feet, his cheeks burning with shame. He looked around, seeing dozens of phones recording him. His fall would be all over the internet in a matter of minutes. His friends refused to meet his eyes. Richard did not move, did not smirk, did not even acknowledge him. He simply stood there, his presence more powerful than anything Jack could have imagined. Jack opened his mouth to say something, anything, to regain control. But the moment was already gone, and he knew it. Jack scrambled to his feet, his breathing ragged, his heart pounding in his chest. Shock coursed through his body. He had never been taken down so effortlessly before. This was not how it was supposed to go. The Buckingham Guard was supposed to be slow, stiff, an easy target. Jack had expected to embarrass him, but now, he was the one standing in front of a laughing crowd, his pride shattered. Applause erupted. The moment he got back on his feet, he realized what had just happened. The tourists were cheering. For Richard. A woman in sunglasses clapped. That was incredible. A man near the front pointed at Jack, shaking his head. "See? That is why you do not mess with them." Another voice cut through the noise. "Respect the Royal Guard." Jack's face burned red. He had been embarrassed on camera. Every second of his fall had been recorded, from the moment his leg had been caught mid-air to the moment his back hit the pavement. And now, hundreds of phones were pointed at him, capturing his humiliation from every angle. He clenched his fists. He could hear the mocking whispers around him. That was pathetic. He really thought he could take him? "I bet this will be all over the internet by tonight." Jack turned to his friends, desperate for support. But instead of backing him up, they looked away, avoiding his gaze. One of them, the tallest, muttered under his breath. "I told you, man, you went too far." Jack's jaw tightened. His entire life, he had been the strongest in the room, the toughest, the most skilled fighter. He had never been embarrassed like this. He turned back to Richard, frustration boiling inside him. The Royal Guard had not even moved from his stance. His posture was perfect, his expression neutral, his presence, an unshakable force. It was as if Jack's attack had never even happened. That made it even worse. Jack took a step forward, his lips curling into an angry sneer. "Oh, so you think you're tough, huh?" Richard did not respond. Jack's fists clenched harder. "What, you cannot even say anything? You just stand there like some kind of machine?" Still. Silence. Jack's face twisted with frustration. He could not let this end like this. He had to regain control. But no matter what he did, the damage was done. The crowd was not on his side. They were not impressed. They were laughing at him. A group of teenagers snickered. One of them mimicked Jack's fall, dramatically throwing himself to the ground, making the others burst into laughter. Someone behind him chuckled. Yeah, real tough guy. Could not last 1 second against the royal guard. Jack's breathing grew uneven. His ears burned with shame. This was not a fight. This was not a competition. This was humiliation. His entire identity, the cocky, undefeated karate master, had been shattered in a single move. And Richard? He was still standing there, silent, composed, as if none of this was even worth his attention. Jack took another step forward, opening his mouth. But then he stopped. A woman holding a phone smirked at him. So, are you going to keep embarrassing yourself, or are you done? Jack's stomach dropped. He looked around again. No one was on his side. He had already lost. Without another word, Jack turned away. His shoulders stiff with rage, his pride crushed beyond repair. And behind him, Richard remained still as a statue. Unshaken. Unbreakable. Jack barely had time to process the humiliation before things got even worse. A sudden shift in the crowd's energy sent a jolt of panic through him. He heard footsteps. Heavy. Deliberate. The kind that meant authority. And then, 2 royal security officers stepped forward, their faces unreadable, their movements swift and professional. The crowd parted instantly, making way for them. The murmurs of amusement turned into whispers of anticipation. Jack's stomach dropped. One of the officers, a tall man with piercing blue eyes, stepped right up to him, his voice cold, firm, and absolute. "Sir, you just assaulted a royal guard." Silence. The crowd held their breath. Jack's face drained of color. He instinctively raised his hands, shaking his head. Wait. What? No, it was just a joke." The officer did not blink. "A joke?" he repeated, his tone dripping with disbelief. Jack nodded quickly, laughing nervously, trying to regain control. "Yeah, come on, man, it was just some fun. The guy didn't even react. Look, he's totally fine." He pointed at Richard. But the royal guard had not moved, still standing, still silent, still the same unshakable force. Jack looked back at the officers, forcing a smirk. "Look, I didn't actually hit him. It wasn't serious." The second officer, a broad-shouldered man with a radio clipped to his vest, cut him off. "Do you realize how serious this is?" Jack froze. The officer's eyes bored into him. "You physically engaged with an on-duty royal guard. That is classified as assault under British law." The words hit him like a hammer. Assault. Jack swallowed hard. He tried to laugh, to wave it off. "Come on, you're not really gonna—" The first officer reached for his cuffs. Click. The cold steel snapped around Jack's wrists. The crowd erupted again, but this time it was not laughter. It was cheers, applause. Jack's eyes widened in horror. Wait! No, you can't be serious. I didn't even hurt him." But the officers ignored him. One of them firmly gripped his arm, turning him toward the exit. Jack's panic spiked. This was no longer a game. His breath came faster. He looked desperately at his friends, searching for help, but they were backing away, avoiding his eyes. They were embarrassed to be associated with him. Jack tried one last time. "Listen, I swear, it was just a joke." The first officer tightened his grip. "Save it for the station." Jack's heart pounded. "The station?" The officer nodded. "You're under arrest." The words rang in Jack's ears like a death sentence. His arrogance, his overconfidence, had led him here. And now, in front of hundreds of people, in front of rolling cameras, he was being escorted away like a criminal. The tourists watched in fascination. Some were still clapping. Others were shouting, "That's what you get. Serves you right. Respect the royal guard." Jack's head spun. His entire life, he had been the one in control, the one people respected. But today, he was just a fool who had taken things too far. The cameras followed his every step, capturing his humiliation in high definition. By the time he was shoved into the back of a police vehicle, reality had fully sunk in. Jack Randall, former karate champion, self-proclaimed master of combat, was now a prisoner, and no amount of skill could get him out of this one. Jack had barely settled into the cold, suffocating reality of his holding cell when the outside world erupted into chaos. It started with one video. A grainy, shaky phone recording, taken by a tourist, showing every humiliating moment of his downfall. Jack Randall, arrogant, cocky, untouchable, taken down in an instant. Within hours, the video spread like wildfire. Karate master humiliated by Buckingham Guard. That was the first headline, and it was everywhere. Every news site, every social media platform, the world had seen it. Jack Randall, former karate champion, now a meme. The internet wasted no time. TikTok. Clips of his defeat were set to dramatic sound effects. Slow-motion replays of him getting slammed to the ground. Edits comparing him to a fallen tree, a cartoon character, a ragdoll. Twitter, X. This is what happens when ego meets real discipline. Bro thought he was in an action movie. Guard didn't even break a sweat, trending worldwide. Respect the guard. Jack got dropped. Man's was not ready YouTube. Every reaction channel jumped on it. Watch this fool get wrecked. Karate versus real military training? Spoiler, it ends badly. Why you never mess with Buckingham Guards? Millions watched. Millions laughed. And Jack's name? It became a joke. Meanwhile, Richard Hunt was experiencing the exact opposite reaction. The man who had barely moved had now become a worldwide legend. His composure was praised. His restraint was admired. His lightning-fast counterattack, absolutely respected. Meet the royal guard who destroyed an arrogant karate master. His name trended alongside Jack's, but for all the right reasons. Richard Hunt, the face of true discipline. News outlets began covering the history of the Royal Guards, their training, their professionalism, their unshakable discipline. Even military veterans chimed in. This is why you never underestimate a trained soldier. A former British Army officer was interviewed. The way he neutralized the situation without excessive force, that is what true training looks like. Richard himself, however, remained silent. He did not comment. He did not post. He did not seek fame. And that made people respect him even more. Jack, on the other hand, the calls started coming in by the hundreds, from his sponsors, from his business partners, from his karate students, and they all had the same message. We can't be associated with this. His deals? Gone. His dojo? Empty. His reputation? Destroyed. Jack sat on the hard bench of his cell, his head in his hands. He had come to London to show off. Instead, he had become a worldwide punchline, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, reporters, cameras, everyone wanted to witness the downfall of Jack Randall. The former karate champion, now a worldwide embarrassment, sat at the defendant's table, his posture stiff, his face pale. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. His lawyer sat beside him, flipping through a thick folder of legal documents. Meanwhile, across the room, the judge sat high on the bench, his expression unreadable. But the tension in the air was unmistakable. This was not just a court case. This was a reckoning. Court is now in session. The judge's stern voice rang through the courtroom. Everyone fell silent. Jack swallowed hard. This was his last chance to salvage what was left of his life. Play the footage. The prosecutor stood, holding up a tablet. A giant screen at the front of the courtroom flickered to life. And there it was. The viral clip. Jack's own humiliation, now being used as evidence against him. Every single second was replayed in crisp detail. Jack taunting Richard. Jack stepping over the barrier. Jack throwing a fake punch. Jack kicking and getting slammed into the pavement. The courtroom erupted with whispers. Even the jury members exchanged glances. The judge? His lips curled into a deep frown. Jack's lawyer scrambled to regain control. Your Honor, my client was merely engaging in a misunderstood stunt. He meant no real harm. The judge raised a hand. A misunderstood stunt, he repeated, his voice cold. The lawyer nodded quickly. Yes, Your Honor. This was not an act of violence. The judge cut him off. Mr. Randall deliberately crossed the barrier, mocked a royal guard, and physically assaulted him. In what world is that not a crime? Silence. Jack's lawyer said nothing, because there was nothing to say. "Mr. Randall, stand up." Jack hesitated, but slowly rose to his feet. He could feel the weight of the entire courtroom pressing down on him. The judge stared at him, his expression cold. Disrespecting a royal guard is not a joke. This was not an accident. This was not an honest mistake. This was arrogance. Reckless, thoughtless arrogance. Jack's throat tightened. The judge sighed, shaking his head. "Mr. Randall, you are charged with assault, public disturbance, and reckless endangerment. You have humiliated yourself, but more importantly, you have disrespected a centuries-old institution." The judge's voice hardened. "Actions have consequences. I hereby sentence you to 6 months in prison." Gasps filled the courtroom. Cameras flashed. Jack's heart stopped. 6 months? His lawyer paled. His friends, sitting behind him, looked stunned. The judge was not done. Let this serve as a reminder to anyone who thinks they can mock tradition, break the law, and walk away unscathed. Court is adjourned. The gavel slammed down. It was over. Jack Randall, the once proud karate master, was now a convicted criminal. His arrogance had cost him everything. As security officers approached, Jack turned to his lawyer, eyes wide with desperation. "This is insane!" he hissed. "I can't go to jail for this!" But the lawyer just shook his head. "You should have thought about that before stepping over that barrier." Jack turned to the judge. "Your Honor, please, The judge barely looked at him. "Take him away." The last thing Jack heard as he was led out of the courtroom was the sound of reporters shouting questions and the laughter of the public. The trial was over. Jack Randall was gone. But at Buckingham Palace, nothing had changed. The royal guard stood as they always had, disciplined, composed, unshaken. And at the center of it all was Richard Hunt, the man who had ended Jack's arrogance with a single move. His expression remained neutral, his posture perfect, his presence commanding. Jack Randall had been sentenced. But Richard, he had simply returned to duty. "Richard Hunt, can we get a statement?" A swarm of journalists crowded outside Buckingham Palace. Cameras flashed, microphones were raised, reporters shouted questions. "Richard, how did you react so fast? Did you expect Jack Randall to attack? How does it feel to go viral worldwide?" But Richard did not speak. He did not flinch. He simply stood at his post, his gaze locked straight ahead, exactly as he had been trained. His actions had already spoken for him, and that was enough. "The Royal Guard has issued an official statement." A BBC news anchor appeared on television, reading from a printed page. Her voice was clear, serious, and sharp. "The Royal Guard exists to uphold tradition, honor, and discipline. These values cannot and will not be challenged. We do not engage in spectacle. We do not entertain disrespect. The actions of our guardsmen reflect a centuries-old code of conduct. That code remains unbroken." The message was clear. Richard Hunt had not won a fight. He had not proven a point. He had simply done his job. A change at Buckingham Palace. In the weeks after the trial, something unexpected happened. Tourists still flocked to Buckingham Palace, but they were different now. They were quieter, more respectful. There were no more mocking tourists trying to make the guards flinch, no more disrespectful challenges. Instead, people stood in silent admiration, watching the guards with a newfound respect. The legend of Richard Hunt had spread across the world, and no one wanted to end up like Jack Randall. Jack Randall, a lesson in humility. Meanwhile, Jack's name became a cautionary tale. His story was taught in martial arts schools as an example of ego versus discipline. His downfall was discussed in psychology articles about arrogance and overconfidence. Online, his legacy had been reduced to one moment, a 6-second video clip. Millions watched as he lunged forward, then hit the pavement. It was everywhere. TikTok, Twitter, YouTube. Jack had spent years building his reputation as a karate master, and he had destroyed it in a single second. Richard Hunt, a man of discipline. Back at Buckingham Palace, Richard continued his duty as if nothing had ever happened. He never gave interviews, never spoke about the incident. never claimed credit for what had happened, because to him, it was never about winning. It was about discipline, a lesson the entire world had just learned. Never underestimate the Royal Guard. Months later, tourists still whispered about the day Jack Randall challenged the Royal Guard. They pointed at the exact spot where he had fallen. They told the story to their children. They looked at the guards differently. Because now, everyone knew the truth. The Royal Guard was not just for show. They were trained. They were dangerous. And they were untouchable. Richard Hunt had proven it, and the world would never forget.